Welcome to the December 4th Town Council meeting. May we have a roll call?
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Syak.
Here.
Councilmember Spector.
Here.
Councilmember Rennie.
Here.
Vice Mayor Jensen.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Leonardis.
Here. I'd like to take this time to invite up our Young Pledge leader. Come all the way over here. I have a microphone for you. Introduce yourself.
My name is Isabella. I'm a kid at Van Meter. I'm in 5th grade. My favorite activities and favorite subjects are Girl Scouts, gymnastics, reading, piano, math, science, and read aloud. And my community service that I've done is making hope bags for the homeless, and I'm also in K-Kids.
That's fantastic. And Isabella, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes.
The flag is over here.
Okay.
You hold the microphone and speak right into it.
I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good job. Thank you very much. Come shake the hand of Isabella. Thank you. Come this way. And wait. We have something for you. Take that home and share it with your family. Okay. Thank you for coming in. Great job. Shake hands. One more round of applause for Isabella. So ordinarily this time of the meeting, well, I think we have a closed session report to report on.
Yes, council met before in closed session to discuss the evaluation of the town manager. No action was taken that requires reporting under the Brown Act.
Thank you. And this is the time of the evening where we normally do manager matters and council matters. I was going to move that to the end of the meeting and go right into public comments. So anybody who has a speaker card. Consent calendar. Oh, the consent calendar will be next. So we'll do the consent calendar, but if you have a speaker card, please bring it forward for public comments. So we have a consent calendar. Do we have anyone who wishes to pull anything from the consent calendar? Any member of council? Seeing none, any member of the audience wish to pull anything from the consent calendar? Seeing none, may I get a vote? Vice Mayor.
Move approval of the consent calendar consisting of items 1 through 4.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. It passes unanimously. Right. Now moving on to public comments. We'll have Michael Silva. Please come forward.
Good evening, Council. Good to see you all. Hey, the wreaths outside look just fabulous in the front. You know, the Christmas wreaths on the light post. Nice touch. Here we commend the Chamber of Commerce for that, right? It's beautiful. I'm here to talk about American Legion Post 99. We don't have a post, which was in Campbell for a while, and we're looking to establish it here in Los Gatos. This particular post did originate in Los Gatos many years ago. It'd be kind of nice if we got back here. We have talked with the assistant town manager and others about this and understand that it's on the agenda for the 18th or of some sort, maybe closed session or something like that. You know, I am on the executive board now. I've been affiliated with them for the last 6, 7, 8, maybe 9 years down there in Campbell. And there's been a lot of programs that they've done that have helped families, vets, and their families, and also the youth. And we think they'd be just perfect to be here. So if you all can see your way to work with us, and establish the post here in town, there's many things we can contribute to town. I think it would be a good thing, being that we all support veterans and that kind of thing anyway. But to establish that here would be wonderful. The American Legion was the first veterans organization that was sanctioned and granted by Congress back in the beginning. They actually were responsible for starting the GI Bill and making that all happen, which we've brought forward in that such. So anyway, that's what I've got to say. I hope to be able to talk to you more. Any questions? Anybody? No?
So, Mr. Silva,
Mr. Mayor?
being that you're very familiar with the Tate Museum, the layout, the size,
Yes.
that would make an adequate space for your needs, for your group?
I believe so, yeah, and we have walked through it and looked at it. It'd be perfect for all the day-to-day things. It'd work real well for small little fundraisers that we do, quiet things, you know. We are talking with the Los Gatos Lodge as far as some of the bigger events that we would do, and they're receptive to that. We haven't really made any plans yet because we're not here. Once we do, then it will be things that will go on. But if there's any large things, we've done car shows, we've done feasts, you know, and things like that to raise funds. That all goes out, but not there. It wouldn't be. We wouldn't want to do it there. It would be more intimate. We'd actually be able to take care of business and be able to pivot. It'd be the clubhouse, if you will, where we can administer everything and connect. We're quite involved with other chapters as well, and there are larger events that happen. We can organize that, but without a real place right now, we're kind of sailing on the ship instead of being able to put our feet on the ground. And once that happens, I think we'll, as a Legion, it'll be great for us, but also we will contribute considerable benefits here in town, I'm sure of that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Silva. Next speaker, Stu Levatai.
Thank you for allowing me to speak, Honorable Mayor and Town Council. My name is Stu Lavate. Lavate is fine. What I like to speak about is in regards how American Legion Post 99 would be able to benefit this wonderful town and the West Valley area. There's many veterans that are suffering from disabilities, physical, mental, from the past veterans, from our past campaigns until present. And I currently work at the VA hospital in Palo Alto as the Veterans Advocate and hospital service representative, and I see it every day. And to allow the West Valley District veterans this opportunity to come and talk with me here rather than driving or finding their way up to Palo Alto would be a great benefit to them, their families, and the whole community. And I'm sure you've heard all the different stories, and I'm just one of the VSOs that are out there to help them make a better life, not just for themselves, their families, friends, but for the community. And that's what I wanted to say. Any questions?
Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Levatai.
Thank you.
Levatai. Next speaker is Chris Wiley.
Good evening. My name's Chris Wiley. I live on University Avenue. I didn't make the last meeting. I did watch it on TV. I had some calls come in saying that it looked kind of rough, and I felt it was kind of rough. So I was going to go to the hardware store and get hatchets for each of you. And then I said, probably the chief would stop that coming in the room. So then I was going to get little rubber hatchets at the dollar store. Then my roommate said, don't even bother. So what I have done tonight is I have printed out hatchets with each of your names on it. I'm going to put it on that table. And I really suggest you kind of take them and look at them, your names are on it, and tear them up and say, as a community, we're going to go forth and forget the past that had the negative stuff. Because I think we have to work together real hard. We have lots of goals this year. We have lots of goals. I think the fires up north are a prime example of a goal that we have to get our CERT program more defined, more community activity, etc. That's an example. And I'm going to put these on the table, and I'm going to give you guys that choice. But I think by tearing these into little pieces, it's showing you buried the hatchet, and we're going to work forward as a team.
Thank you, Ms. Wiley. Is there any questions for the speaker? Thank you. Next speaker is Mark Trout.
Hello, everybody. So get 3 minutes, okay. I like the way you have it, so you can ask questions if you want to. If you want to ask any, questions, I'd be glad to. When we salute the flag, of course, we acknowledge we're one nation under God, right? Hopefully we're thinking about that, and at church we have a song book, and in the back there's a prayer, and it's really a powerful prayer, and I'd like to read a part of it. It says, "Strengthen the civil magistrates of thy people, in order that they may wield the sword of worldly power in justice and with wise restraint. In particular do we pray for the civil rulers, both higher and lower officers of government, whom thou hast been pleased to appoint over us. We commend unto thee especially the esteemed council of this city. Grant that their rule may be entirely directed toward the supremacy of the King of Kings over rulers and ruled alike. May through their labors the shameful and wicked dominion of Satan be increasingly disturbed and broken down through their labors. May through their labors the shameful and wicked dominion of Satan be increasingly disturbed and broken down. May it be given unto us to lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and gravity. Hear us, O God and Father, through thy dear Son, Jesus Christ, who with thee and the Holy Spirit, the only and true God, is worthy of eternal praise and glory. Amen." There's a book I've read recently by a Jewish Christian by the name of Jonathan Cahn, and it's called The Harbinger, and it's quite it's written like a narrative, and so Christians over the years have asked me to read it, and because he doesn't understand that the Sabbath year is 2009, he thinks it's 2008. I've put off reading it, never have read it. But I've learned you can be, as a Christian, totally wrong on a point and yet have something else that another Christian doesn't understand, and you're totally right on that. And I don't know if you know about it's called the miracle of 9/11, because the very church that George Washington prayed in New York, it's called St. Paul's Chapel, was spared by the sycamore tree that gave its life, so to speak, for the church. I mean, God's hand was in that, but it's amazing. When Tom Daschle got up and read Isaiah 9, I would hope that everyone here would read Isaiah 9, the whole chapter, not just that one verse he quoted, because I see my time's about up, but really, read the 9th chapter of Isaiah, please, okay? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Trout. Are there any other cards this evening for public forum? Seeing none coming forward, we'll close that, and we'll move on to our first public hearing, which is approving an amendment to the employment agreement between the Town of Los Gatos and the Town Attorney, and the authorization of salary and benefit budget adjustments in the amount of $10,859 from estimates available in the fiscal 18-19 operating revenue. Leading our report this evening is Lisa Velasco, our Human Resources Director.
Good evening, thank you. Before you tonight is a recommendation to formally approve amendments to the employment agreement for the town attorney. In compliance with Senate Bill 1436, a summary of the modifications to the amendment include a base salary increase to $225,000 annually, and a one-time lump sum performance bonus of $3,225. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Velasco. Do we have any questions from the town council? Seeing none, we will move to our public comments on this subject. Does anybody from the public wish to speak on this item? Seeing no one coming forward, we will close the public hearing and move to council for discussion or motion. Vice Mayor Jensen?
I will move that we approve an amendment to the employment agreement between the town of Los Gatos and the town attorney that is contained in attachment 1 of our staff report.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Councilmember Sayak?
Second it.
All right. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Velasco. Moving on to item number 6, considering revisions to the Council Policy 2-01, which is the town agenda format and rules. Ms. Pravetti, do we have a report?
Thank you. Very briefly, the mayor requested that the town council consider proposed revisions to our agenda order in order to facilitate the completion of town business. Before you are revisions that would move the consent calendar, council matters, and manager matters to the end of the agenda. If this is approved, this policy applies to all town committees, boards, and commissions. That concludes staff's report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pravetti. So we move to council for discussion and or questions on this item. Councilmember Sayak.
Ms. Pravetti, if you could just remind me, I know the Planning Commission, they have commission matters and director matters at the end of the agenda currently?
I believe so. Yes, thank you.
But verbal communications remains in the beginning?
Yes.
Okay.
Further questions? Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. There are 2 items basically that we're being asked to change, and one is when the council and the manager makes their reports. Let's assume for the sake of this question that I feel one way about that at this point. But why is staff and maybe the mayor suggesting that the consent go at the end?
Okay, so I can answer to that. What I thought about was when we get several items that get pulled from the consent calendar and we choose to hear those items prior to our public hearings, sometimes the first 2 or 3 hours of our meeting we spend just getting through the consent calendar because we have public hearings that on items that were pulled that we weren't intending to hear. So what happens is individuals who come for other business, their hearings, their projects, they bring along with them staff, architects, attorneys, sometimes, of course, their friends, their speakers, their kids, and they end up having to wait some time for a considerable amount of time until after these consent items, which were pulled from the consent calendar, are heard. And sometimes our meetings become very lengthy, and I think it would be best to potentially consider moving the consent calendar to the end in the event items are pulled so the people's business can get done first. And if we have to take one of those consent items and move it to another week and have it become a public hearing, then I think it gives us that opportunity. I also think of our staff, and most of them are here for 8 to 10 hours a day, plus their commutes. And if we have a meeting that starts at 6 at the end of their day, and we have 2 or 3 hours worth of consent items pulled, and then our meeting ends up going till midnight, they don't get to see their families. So there's a lot of reasons. Other boards and committees that I serve on behalf of the town of Los Gatos, most of the time the consent items are put at the end as well. So it's just an item I wanted to bring forward to the council this evening for discussion. It's something that I think has some merit based on the items I described, but I'm open-minded to hearing what the rest of the council has to say about it. Thank you. Councilmember Rennie.
Thank you. Question for staff. Doesn't the mayor have the discretion to move any item pulled from the consent calendar, assuming it's done at the beginning of the meeting? Any item that gets pulled to later, it doesn't have to be heard right away, correct?
That's correct.
So we could still have the consent calendar at the beginning, and then anything pulled, put wherever the mayor wants to put it.
Yes.
Thanks.
Further questions? Seeing none, we will move to the public hearing on this subject. If you would like to speak, please fill out a card and bring it forward.
Hi, sorry, I didn't know if there were other cards. Maria Risto, 85 Broadway. I appreciate the mayor's explanation of why this item is on here, because as a resident who regularly attends town council meetings, and other people do, one of the concerns I would have about moving consent to the end of the agenda is that often there are items on the consent calendar where, for example, if it's a new bike and pet improvement project or something else, there might be people from Safe Routes to School that show up in case the item gets pulled and they want to be there to speak. And my concern would be that there's this uncertainty. If the item is at the end, I would urge you to consider that it may in fact create more time for people because they have to wait until all the items that are agendized are done before they know if something's pulled or not. I also felt like the mayor always has the discretion to hear items in any order, and so if the mayor and the town manager chose to put something on consent thinking it wouldn't be contentious, and then it was, there is the option to put it after the other items, continue it to another meeting, etc. Another concern I have is that in terms of staff time, I know, for example, sometimes staff members are here with a report just in case a consent item is pulled, and if it's not, they're free to go. And so now they have the onus of staying through the whole meeting not knowing if an item is going to be pulled. Finally, I looked through a variety of towns, probably about 15 in the area across the country, and I didn't see where consent was at the end. If the intention is to streamline the meeting, then I would hope at least up front the question of whether a consent item is going to be pulled came up first. From a point where this impacts all commissions and committees, a concern I would have is on transportation and parking. If we have a lengthy discussion coming up, our meetings are at 7:30 in the morning. Our youth commissioner cannot stay for the whole meeting because he or she often has to get off to school, and we try and make the items that matter the most for that person occur early on. We could hit a point where people have obligations, we've rearranged, but we can't even approve the minutes if we don't have a quorum by the time we get to it. So just a bunch of little situations. I'm not for or against it. I just had some concerns because I didn't understand it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Risto. Are there any questions for the speaker? Seeing none, thanks. All right, back to council discussion. We will close the public hearing if no one else wants to speak. Vice Mayor?
So I'll just start with a discussion and some observations, not with a motion. I don't have an issue with moving council matters, manager matters to the end. The only potential issue I see with that is that sometimes, well, I think that council matters have, the way we have been doing it lately, have become sort of obligatory, as though you believe that you have to say something even though you don't have anything particularly insightful or valuable to say. To me, they are an occasion to communicate to the town and to other council members something that you might have learned, an issue that is coming up, a policy discussion that the town is having, a meeting date that people might be interested in, as opposed to I went to wherever I went. That may not necessarily fit the category of what I would consider to be something that should be communicated. So if there is something important, I think maybe that ought to be taken care of up front, and that people ought to be encouraged to use discretion about what actually is a council matter. Same with manager matters, and they could be very short if they were done that way. As to the consent calendar, I do agree with Ms. Ristow that we make an educated guess about items that we think are going to be non-controversial. And there could be things on that consent calendar that are important by way of contractual agreements, something that we have to get handled, a signature, something that we can make a reasonable assumption is not controversial. And there are those people that come just in case, and those people might be forced to stay here the entire meeting, as opposed to the person with a public hearing who's got to wait for their matter to be handled in any event. So if the council consent calendar goes the way it should be out of the way. And then the mayor still has the discretion to move an item that may be lengthy to a different time in the agenda. So I don't necessarily see the necessity to change this. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Going back to what I was saying before we opened this up to public testimony, in reviewing the request to modify Town Policy 2-01, I understood and appreciated and actually agreed with moving council matters and manager matters to the end of the agenda. I had concerns that have been verbalized by both the community and the council on moving the consent calendar to the end of the agenda. So not knowing where this is all going to go, I'm going to move to amend Council Policy 2-01 to note on that policy that the council matters and manager matters will be heard at the end of the agenda. I would keep the consent calendar at the beginning of the agenda and noting, and I will defer to the mayor and the town manager on this. We could note on the agenda that the mayor has the discretion of placing any matter pulled from the consent calendar to the end of the calendar.
We have a motion, and do we have a second?
I'll second the motion as stated.
Thank you, Councilmember Sayoc. Further discussion? Councilmember Rennie?
I have a little concern moving the manager matters to the end. The town manager writes us a report every week of what's going on, so I don't think the manager matters are really for the council members to hear. Council matters are, because we're sharing with each other. So a lot of times what manager matters are really about communicating and sharing with the public, and the town manager is currently trying to improve our communications and our communication plans. And I think that if you think about it, we have many meetings that make it to 11, 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. Nobody's going to be left to listen to the manager matters, so what's the point of it at all? Because we all are going to get it in our Friday packet. So I mean, what just cancel manager matters as far as I'm concerned if we're moving it to the end.
Right, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No.
So it passes 4-1. Thank you, council. We'll be moving on to public hearing number 7 on our agenda this evening. This is the Town Code Amendment for application A-17-002, and this is townwide. It's considering the amendments to Chapter 6 of our building code and Chapter 29 of our zoning regulations regarding fences, hedges, and walls. And presenting our report is our planner, Mr. Sean Mullen.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, council members. Before you tonight is consideration of an amendment to Chapters 6 and 29 of the Town Code regarding fences, hedges, and walls. The council last considered a draft ordinance in October, where it was continued and forwarded to the Policy Committee for consideration. And on November 15th, the Policy Committee received public testimony and discussed the points forwarded by the council. The committee directed staff to prepare a draft ordinance for consideration by the council to address several regulations related to fences, hedges, and walls. The policy committee also provided direction to staff regarding regulations in the hillside area and continued that matter to a date uncertain. The draft ordinance before you tonight includes 3 main components not included in the current ordinance. The first is an increase in the maximum fence height to 7 feet. applicable only in the non-hillside areas. The second is a 3-foot height limit for fences in the required front and street abutting side yards to address safety concerns related to sight lines. This would be applicable throughout town. And lastly, the ordinance includes an 18-foot setback requirement for vehicular gates to allow ample room for vehicle queuing, and this would also be applicable throughout town. The draft ordinance would not introduce a planning permit requirement for fencing at this time. Staff recommends the council review the draft and introduce the ordinance affecting the amendments to the town code. This concludes staff's presentation, and we are available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mullins. Do we have questions? We have one from the Vice Mayor.
Question and a comment. Mr. Mullen, we got a letter from San Jose Water regarding essentially security of their facilities. I'm assuming that we have that situation already. So how are we dealing with it already?
In my experience, I've worked on, I believe, 2 water tank projects, and there was a request to include barbed wire on there around the perimeter and in some of the interiors, and that was not granted because the town code explicitly prohibits that. There was an additional request to allow for an 8-foot fence, which we did. I did grant, I believe, in both circumstances. The town code currently allows for that. The draft ordinance that the council considered for the hillside issue, I believe maybe 2 meetings ago, did include an exception for security fencing around utility installations. That could, if the council's amenable to that, that could be added in as well to the draft in front of you tonight.
Okay, a follow-up question. I'm assuming that most of the water facilities that we're concerned about are in the hillside area?
I'm not aware of their distribution. The ones I've worked on are in the hillside.
Okay. So in theory, that could be handled when we consider the hillside portion of the ordinance.
That's correct.
Okay. And my comment, Mr. Rennie can correct me if I say anything wrong, when the policy committee considered this, what we did was split the flatland from the hillside and asked that we could consider this because there seemed to be not so much controversy about the flatlands, but more controversy about the hillside, and that's coming back later.
Right, Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Questions of staff, a couple questions, and both of them relate to the letters or communications we receive from the public. One had to do with expanding the definition of materials. Electric fences, wire fences, et cetera. What is staff's input to that?
Most often, and you know, the draft, the person who wrote the letter could correct me, but most often I believe the types of fences that they referenced would be used to exclude animals from their property, which seems to be more of a hillside issue than a flatland issue, for lack of a better term. So the draft that was last reviewed by the council that included hillside regulations included a list of materials much more robust that were prohibited in the hillside area.
Councilmember Spector.
Understanding that the issue would be more prevalent in the hillside, what, if any, would be the objection to having this expanded list of materials applicable to the flatlands?
Staff would not have an objection.
And then following up on the prior questions with regard to the water district, understanding that the water district properties might be on the hillside or could be in the flatlands, is there something that we should be addressing in the flatland portions of our ordinance because the water district properties could be in the flatlands?
Something that could work for throughout town would be an exception process to allow, if a security concern came up, an exception process that would allow alternate materials, barbed wire or something like that, or increased fence heights, which is in the draft ordinance in front of you.
And would the draft ordinance allow for this exception process?
Currently as written, no. It would allow for an 8-foot height exception, but not for the alternate materials.
So are you suggesting that we include an exception process to the ordinance that's before us this evening.
That would be an effective way to address the concerns that the San Jose Water expressed.
Thank you.
Any more comments or questions for staff? Seeing none, we'll move forward to the public hearing. The first card I have is David Klinger.
Hello, I'm Dave Klinger. Thank you for hearing this issue. I need to put on my glasses here, but it's within my 3 minutes. Something there is that doesn't love a wall. So begins Robert Frost's poetic soliloquy, Mending Wall. Later on, the speaker's neighbor asserts, like his father had, good fences make good neighbors. If only it were that easy. Fences are built to protect and defend people, animals, property, and privacy, while not sacrificing safety, enjoyment, views, property rights, and neighborhood character. In other words, fences are compromises. Ideally, neighbors would just get together and agree on what should be built. Realistically, however, government needs to codify standards to avert contention. These standards must reflect the consensus of the community on what constitutes a proper and acceptable fence. In my opinion, the current codified standards of 6 feet heights for non-hillside lots do not represent what the community desires. As a result, many Los Gatos residents ignore the code. The town has chosen not to enforce existing fence height code, probably because there has been no call for enforcement. Apparently, the community accepts the 6-foot plus 1-foot lattice fences that are prevalent. Additionally, the town accepts fees to process height waivers applications from those very few residents who choose to comply with the town law for higher fences. This does not strike me as being fair to those who, in order to comply, must document a special privacy concern, obtain the written approval of all adjoining neighbors, and pay a $233 fee. Several arguments for a change to the 6-foot height current standard are included in tonight's written public input. In addition to that, though, enforceable standards are needed for front and corner lot or street abutting fences to promote the safety of pedestrians and drivers and to preserve neighborhood character. In my opinion, the proposed ordinance is a good compromise and a standard that will be supported by the community. I urge you to concur with the Planning Commission's previous endorsement and adopt this ordinance. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Klinger. Are there any questions? Seeing none. Thank you. Next speaker, Aduna Lawbring. Did I get it right?
That was close. It's my writing. Ed Lamping. Perhaps.
Can you state your name for the...
Ed Lambing. I'm a resident of the town of Los Gatos. Good evening. I'm representing San Jose Water Company here tonight, and I just wanted to thank Mr. Mullen for sharing with us and engaging with Scott to have a discussion about this. I think there's workable solutions. So I really wanted to come here tonight and just remind everybody about the importance of San Jose Water Company's role in the community. We're a unique entity that's been serving the town for a long time, since before 1890. There's been a lot of changes in our system over the years. I've had the good fortune of working with a lot of great people at the town to afford that, whether it was driven by our capital program or to respond to the public works projects that have been occurring. But it really is a core responsibility that I take seriously, and so do my colleagues at San Jose Water, to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public we serve. And along with that is the physical security of our facilities. And you know, for the tank that was built in conjunction with that development, Highlands of Los Gatos, and the inability for us to secure our site to protect the water supply, it has brought some frustration in our organization, and we're experiencing that in the city of San Jose, and we're trying to work things out. So I appreciate the consideration for the exemption status for height. I would really like to continue the conversation about why it's important for us to take these other precautions to protect all of you, all of your constituents, the families, and the pets that are drinking, ingesting the water we deliver. It's important, and I appreciate the consideration. Thank you.
We have a question for you, Mr. Lambring.
Okay.
Thank you. Question, you were here when we had the discussion with staff with regard to the San Jose Water Company letter, and the suggestion that was made is with regard to what I'm going to call the flat land part of the ordinance that's currently before us, that the requests such as your company's be handled through an exception process. What is your thinking about that?
I think that's a fine way to go because our circumstances are unique. Sometimes we don't have the ability to have that gate 18 feet back from the roadway. And they're usually in quieter neighborhoods on less heavily traveled roads. But we also have very significant infrastructure up on Laurel where our Mountain Springs Reservoir is. We're currently replacing we have a big reservoir replacement project that's situated back in the back of Belgados Park. And we do have a lot of facilities that serve the community because of the topography of the area. We run a series of lift stations and storage facilities up all the way to Aztec Ridge. And there's a number of other areas in the town where we have a lot of pumping and storage facilities. And the storage facilities, as well as the pumping, need to have that adequate physical security, and we look forward to working with staff to accomplish that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I have no more cards on this matter, so I'll close the public hearing. We'll move on to council for discussion and/or motions. No questions for staff. Councilmember Sayoc.
Okay, if the council is ready, I'll go ahead and make a motion. I appreciate all the discussion that we've had on the past, and I like the idea that the policy committee has brought forward of separating fencing that is specific to hillside versus what we call our flatlands. So I'll make the motion that we do consider the proposed amendments and introduce the draft ordinance by the title only to amend Chapter 6, which is contained in our attachment 21, and to also include provisions as discussed for specific emergency precautions that are needed.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Vice Mayor?
Second.
Further discussion? Councilmember Spector.
I may support the motion. I like the fact that the exception process for the flatlands, I think, is included in this motion. But the expansion of prohibited materials was something that I was hoping this council would include in its ordinance.
We have comments by Councilmember Spector. Are there any other comments or further discussion?
I don't have a comment, but I do have a question of staff.
Please.
And so again, if you could just answer again for me, Mr. Mullen, the expansion of materials, a lot of that discussion was around hillsides. But do you think that there is a need to specify that for what we're calling our flatland?
The need, it's a tough question, I think. The hillside, it seemed more specific to the hillside because we were seeing the direction the drafter of the original ordinance was going was for very open fences and very transparent fences. So a lot of materials got prohibited. If the council feels that it's also a good direction to incorporate into the non-hillside areas, I think it would be important to look at that list of materials and make sure that it's applicable to both sides, and it's not going to have an unintended consequence of prohibiting a material that is widely used and then creating many non-conforming situations.
Okay.
Councilmember Spector.
I will support the motion, and I'll look to the maker of the motion to see if the prohibited materials are included in the flatlands. And if they are not, by virtue of this motion, I would hope that the policy committee considers them when it continues on with its fence ordinance, even though these materials might be considered objectionable in the hillside, that they also be considered as to whether or not they're objectionable in the flatlands.
Councilmember Sayak.
And as the maker of the motion, I will not include it in the motion, but would agree with that direction to the policy committee and to staff when reviewing the next iteration for hillsides.
Thank you. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. So now we get to move on to council matters. Or do we have to do the clerk doesn't have to read? Okay, thank you.
Ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos amending Chapter 6, Section 6.150.050 and Chapter 29 zoning regulations, Section 29.40.030 of the Town Code regarding fences, hedges, and walls.
Thank you. Now we can move on to council matters. Councilmember Sayak.
Okay, what I would like to share with the council as well as our audience is that there are several bills that are approaching. I believe SB 50 is one that is a reiteration of last year's 827 that I'd like the council as well as the general public to pay attention. It looks at relaxing zoning laws around transit-oriented development. And I know that as our ABAG representative, there will be significant opportunities to weigh in on future versions that are coming through. And I'd like this council to consider making strong statements one way or the other after analysis with staff has been taken.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Following up on that, when Ms. Sayak references transit, the transit includes, or is proposed to include, buses. And so you must keep that in mind when you're making these considerations. Now, going back, in addition to the tree lighting and the holiday parade, I have met over the past 2 weeks with many members of the community on a variety of issues.
Thank you. Vice Mayor.
Following up with Ms. Sayak, as the current town representative to ABAG, I will be attending a meeting on December 10th to discuss the issues that Ms. Sayak has said, and thank you for bringing to my attention the CASA initiative from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which has several points that could have a great impact on housing, tenant occupancy, renter occupancy, all kinds of issues surrounding housing that the town manager is working on a letter. So if you have input on that, or if any town residents of town are concerned, let me know, let Ms. Pravetti know, so that we can convey those concerns on Monday night to ABAG. And also with respect to the proposed ordinances or state laws that Ms. Sayak is talking about, one thing that I'd like the town to be aware of and get defined for us is, in addition to just transit and buses, there is a category for, I forget what it's called, but major employers. And I'm wondering, do we have major employers? I suspect we do in town, and how does that bill affect us in that regard?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Rennie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've had several meetings with the public and with the city of Morgan Hill relating to an annexation of land from the county into the city of Morgan Hill for the stated purpose of building a Catholic high school. This annexation is on LAFCO's agenda tomorrow, where I'm a commissioner representing, I guess, most of the cities in the county. Also, I attended Assemblymember Lowe's Council Appreciation Lunch with the mayor and with Councilmember Sack. On 11/30, in my role as an alternate to the VTA board representing the West Valley cities, I filled in at the VTA board subcommittee on capital programs. The meeting was mostly about the revision of the capital programs planning process. 11:30, I also, the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority Legislative Ad Hoc Committee met, and our focus was discussion of 3 bill ideas we had and are planning to ask legislators to carry for us. And there was discussion of a very negative outcome from the CPUC relating to resource adequacy that looks to put 20 million of our contracts at risk. So those were significant discussions. Also, on 12/3, I met with I had a phone call with somebody for a grand jury inquiry, of which I guess I'm supposed to keep the subject confidential at this point. And that's it for me.
Thank you. Manager Matters, Ms. Peretti.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of things. It is the holiday season, and we welcome our residents and businesses to enjoy downtown. We have free valet parking, and in addition, we have started to relax our parking limits. There are no parking limits in the municipal lots downtown, so please come downtown and shop. And those of you who are interested in the long-term future for Los Gatos, please join us on Tuesday, the 11th of December, where our General Plan Committee will continue to discuss issues and opportunities at 7 p.m. in these chambers. Thank you.
Thank you. This meeting is now adjourned.